I always think about why I like whitetails so much is there's something I can do every single month of the year.
Right.
Obviously you're not hunting them in,
Hmm.
in the winter, in the spring, summer, but there's so much scouting in play. And I've always thought
Right.
about Western hunting, like, well, I have some buddies who scout a lot, but a
Hmm.
lot of the Western hunters I know don't scout that much. And they end up, because they know they get in there and the elk are going to be bugling and they're going to be playing that kind of game, kind of like the run and gun
Yeah.
turkey thing. If you take a shotgun
Yeah.
out for turkeys, a lot of you don't really need to scout a whole lot because you're
Yeah. Yeah.
the nature of it. Bow hunting turkeys is a little different, especially early season. But to hear you say that and to get out there and know, or just to learn from a year-round dedication to be outside
Yeah.
it's an interesting perspective. I want to ask you. You just mentioned that your successful elk hunts have been afternoon hunts, and that's your
Yeah.
style. Is that
Yeah.
and then you kind of alluded to the bedroom thing. Is that
Yeah.
because you're scouting and okay, these bulls are going to end up here probably on this bench in the middle of the day, and so you can play that like you're intentionally scouting for those spots, and then you're playing the afternoon hunts around that?
Yeah, I certainly understand where the elk are going to be or where they want to be because we do spend a lot of time out there in the summer. But I think the reason I like the hunting elk in the evening is because rather than them coming back, like in the morning, they're coming back from either feeding or breeding and wanting to go lay down for a while. They know where they want to go. They have a pretty good idea of where they want to try to end up. So that you're never going to beat elk. I'm more understanding where an elk is, whether that's locating them by bugle or watching them bed midday, and then getting them as they're coming up off their bed because he's more concerned, in the morning about getting his cows up to where that he wants to go. Then in the afternoon, he's a little bit more relaxed. He'll get up and check cows and he'll move around and sort of understand what his harem's doing. But it's much easier to tiptoe around in there with those elk in one place rather than trying to chase those things down and get in front of them. I think that you hit a couple of interesting things during the morning where you might be able to pull that bull off, especially satellite bulls. But if you're trying to kill a 300-inch mature bull, you have a much better chance, I think, in the mid-afternoon to evening, just because those elk are starting to get up and they're starting to go move again, but they're not on a dead sprint, back from wherever they've been feeding. So,
It's almost like a staging area hunt. It sounds like
yeah,
to me.
yep,
It's
100%.
but it's also it. I'm just assuming here, but does this also tie into the fact that when you're sitting on those bulls and he's bedded there, and every once in a while he sounds off from his bed, you got the afternoon hunt coming. You also probably can rely on the thermals a little more as opposed to
Yeah.
following those bulls in the morning and looking at your watch, going, okay, it's 9 o'clock. This thing's going to switch and it's going to get real nasty here in a hurry.
Yeah, exactly. I think you just have a little more predictability sometimes, especially if you're on, more consistent slopes. Essentially, if you're on a flat spot, you can sort of see the wind. Does get swirly though at times, and I think that's why there's such an emphasis around wind. Like I will not, I will risk an elk seeing me. I will risk an elk hearing me in a way that doesn't sound like an elk over wind every time. Like I
Mm-hmm.
will back out of a situation if that elk has a 5% chance of smelling me. Just because they already are so smart, right? They know exactly what's going on. They know exactly what they're smelling. And there's a big difference. And if an elk sees it, he might just dip down into the bottom of the draw and maybe up the other side and he'll be fine. But if he smells you, it's over,
Yeah.
especially if the cows smell you.
Yeah.
But that's a great point. I think the afternoon lends itself to a little more predictability, especially compared to the morning
Mm-hmm.
as far as wind goes.
Do you think coming from, you're speaking as an elk hunter who lives there, gets to scout,
Hmm.
spends a lot of time during the season. And, a lot of people listening to this, they get 7 days out there or 8 days or 10
Yep.
days. And, they're thinking, and I'm thinking this too. I'm like, when I get out there and I have a week to elk hunt, I can't take mornings off or, like and I don't mean that like to sleep in, but and I don't think you do either, but to
No.
play it super safe and stay back. That's a function of your experience knowing like, okay, if I go in now, there's a chance to pull that bull off or maybe run into him somehow where this unfolds, but it's a way better chance if I lay back, keep track of him, keep track of his cows, and let the
Mhm.
situation turn into something that works for me.
Yeah, certainly. And I think if you're a first time elk hunter, there's no reason that you shouldn't be hunting those elk all day. If you can keep your wind right and you can understand, it's going to give you, tenfold experience versus just maybe, just saying, oh, I'm going to wait till the wind is good here. It also depends on your elk density too. So a lot of states that you can hunt in, you might, if you're on a group of elk and there's a big bull in there, that might be the only bull in that whole drainage. Whereas like other states with high density, you might be able to blow a group out and still have an opportunity at another bull. And I think that's really important to understand too. And when you're thinking about how to plan your hunt and how to go out of state for maybe the first time or fifth time or whatever it is, we just have so many more resources now than we did even when I was starting, which was not that long ago. I think what sort of changed the needle or moved the needle for me is I just had guys that knew what they were doing. So I learned really quickly. So if you're by yourself, there's great resources, whether it's Onyx and Go Hunt and Hunt and Fool and all these resources to get you in the right spot, first of all. And then when it comes down to it, the educational opportunities out there, I think you can listen to all the YouTube videos you want, but until you're on the ground and you understand like what the wind actually feels like when it's on your neck and what the actual topography looks like, how far you can go in a day, how much water you need, you got to be patient with that learning curve for sure.
Yeah. Well, and this is one of the hardest parts about, we encourage people to head out west and hunt all the time. Like I want everybody to experience that because I think it's going to go away for most people eventually. Yeah. It's going to just get a lot harder. But right. You can't go out there with experience. Like you're only going to get so much as you have. And I talk about this, I just did some seminars at the Minnesota Deer Classic. And one of the things I talk about is how hard it is for people to seal the deal, to that moment of truth, make the shot. And this is elk hunting. This is whitetail hunting. I was particularly talking about whitetail hunting, but the only way to get over it is through a lot of experience. And that's a frustrating thing. Man.
I was on whitetail hunting. I haven't hunted whitetails out of a tree for a long time until this last year. We were basically hunting with my good friend Jordan Budd on her place in Nebraska. And the first sit, I had like 11 2.5-year-old deer in front of me, just passing through. It was just epic, like one of the best sits ever. And finally I'm watching these deer, and you can kind of get away with a lot with those young deer, especially with the way this setup was and whatever. But finally, good deer, 140-inch deer came through at 70 yards, and I messed up, man. He saw me in the tree, which is like, I would never make that mistake elk hunting now. Right. But here I am, like back in my home turf doing the thing that I grew up doing. And because I lack that long-term experience, I haven't done that probably since I was in college. I just got beat, Yep. And that's going to happen every time you elk hunt. Like I didn't kill a bull last year, I didn't get beat, but I just didn't kill a bull. And that is the difference, I think, between a little, or I should say the similarities and just understanding that experience is what's going to drive you to success. I believe that because that's how I am, but I think maybe there's some guys that can, there's a lot of guys that I grew up with Minnesota that kill a bull every year because they're really good at going in for 5 days and making it count. I'm not that, I won't ever say that I'm a great elk hunter. I think I'm getting better, but every time I'm out there, I'm continually learning about what those elk are going to do. And, it's a different beast when you're on a big chunk of public ground too, man. I will tell you, it's especially with pressured elk, and never want to use that as an excuse, but every time you're in the woods is a better day, better than you were the day before,
Yep. Well, it's just an accumulation of experience, and it's not just the dedicated days to elk. Or the dedicated days to the whitetails. It's being in the woods more. And this is, I've been talking to a whole bunch of, our fellow content creators out there about this gap we have now where we focus so much on big whitetails and big elk that we've missed the small game thing and the upland thing to some extent. And, most people would never look at a pheasant hunt and go, that's not, they don't think that's going to make them a better deer hunter. And I think the more time you spend out there in places where wild critters live, the better off you are. And the sealing the deal thing, the buck fever, bull fever, whatever you want to call it, that is like such a thing that so many people suffer from that don't think so or don't really understand. And there, people will tell me stories all the time about how they miss and it wasn't buck fever or whatever, and I'm like, okay.
Right.
But what I think, and I just know this from so much hunting, is you can't shortcut that part. Like you're going to get there and it's going to take you a lot of screwing up to get there.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and you'll keep it together enough if you keep going at it to get better. But the more time you spend out there and the more time, like you're talking about laying back and watching those elk, the more time you go out in the summer and glass whitetails and you watch that big bachelor group come out and you realize they're not these crazy mythical creatures. They're not these neurotic creatures that are like scared of their own shadow, but there's something that we're not around very much. And I think this doesn't happen probably in the elk world, but I think in the whitetail world, we get this false sense of confidence about whitetails through trail cameras, where we put a trail camera out, we get pictures of big bucks, we go, that dude lives there, and it makes us think that we're like really on them and we're in the game, but it's like such a voyeuristic, removed type of encounter that it doesn't get us anywhere as far as when that buck's actually walking in and you've hunted all season and you fall apart, there's no amount of trail camera work that you could have done to prevent that.
Exactly. I think the technology of video trail cameras have helped just a little bit to understand like how a deer moves into an area versus just like, okay, there he's there at 7:38. I need to be there at 7:38. The difference though is like, I don't get as elk feverish because I think with a bow anyway, because the situations sort of occur consistently, and they also like when the elk is coming in, there's not usually a lot of time between like the time you stop calling and the time you draw your bow, right? It just happens. But I'll tell you what, I came to full draw on a young whitetail in Nebraska, and you could have heard my arrow rattling from the truck a mile away. I mean, it's just brutal, right? I mean, I don't know what it is, but it's just I think watching that situation occur just revs you up so much faster. Mm-hmm. The difference with elk though, man, is it's just like it's usually happens pretty quick. When it's going to happen, it's like that bull's going to come in and check out what you are. He's not going to waste his time. Now, sometimes they'll come in slow and quiet and whatever, but if you're like in the heart of the rut, it's just like boom, boom, it happens.
Yep.
And that's the difference. But I think back to that, like that video comment about trail cameras, man, we started using those stealth cams on the place we were elk guiding. And that is an incredible way to gather intel, certainly if you're from afar. So if you're able to kind of like understand where you're going to hunt and maybe get a little bit of scouting time in there, that's a really good way. And then also, this is like my favorite time to be in the woods is the springtime, because you get to watch elk, specifically cows, and move around undisturbed, right? Nobody's hunting them. If people are ethical, they're not shed hunting them and pushing them out. And I think like the nature there is like, we have a guy in our office, his name's Duke, and he's a mule deer fanatic, like thinks about deer more than anybody I've ever met. And he watches deer like 270 days a year. Like he is out there watching deer. And the reason is like, when it comes down to that 30-second stalk or whatever, 30-minute stalk or whatever it is, he knows the tendencies of those bucks in an undisturbed way. Yep. He knows if they're going to go left or right, uphill, downhill, into the wind, out of the wind. He knows their escape routes. He knows where they're going to be. So that's the kind of thing, but that really, really can change, I think, somebody from being a sort of observer of elk to a killer of elk or deer or whatever it is. Now, granted, if you have 5 days to hunt, you're not going to have that experience all summer long. But I think what you can do is take a little bit of time before that season opens and before you hunt to just like spend a day learning where you are, and understanding, finding elk, watch what they do. A lot of guys are like, there's elk, we need to go kill them. And I'm guilty of this 100% because I like to hunt elk aggressively. But there's a real currency or spend, I should say, of your currency of just watching elk and understanding what they're going to do. It's just such vital information,